Hi everyone, my name's Dylan. I'm the Senior Grants Officer at the British Ecological Society. So if any of you ever have emailed the grants inbox, it'll have gone to me. Um, Thank you again very much for coming during your lunchtime today. So we've got a really kind of packed schedule for this hour. So we have three speakers who've all been previous winners of BES grants. So they're going to tell you all about their experience and share some top tips as well. After all three of them have spoken, there'll be a chance to ask questions. So as Rachel said, there's a Q&A box. If you do have any questions for any of our speakers today, you can put them in the Q&A box and we'll ask them all at the end after all three have spoken. And once they've spoken, I'll do the second part of this webinar, which is telling you all about how grants work in the BES, tell you a little bit about our review college, about the funding round that's coming up in June, and also some top tips as well for if you do come to write a grant application with the BES. I can give you some top pieces of advice and some of the common downfalls as well and how to avoid them. So with that, I'll pass over to our first speaker, which is Arola. So Arola is one of our small research grant winners. So I'll let them tell you all about their project. So Arola, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dylan, and thanks for having me. And this, I think I have control now. Fantastic. Yes. So I'm going to present very quickly my research journey and how the small grant that I secured last year helped me on that. A little bit of how the fund project was and the aims and everything, and what happened afterwards. And firstly, I wanted to highlight one aspect that was very important for me when I asked for this small grant, is that I was on this transition, like in this process of transitioning between postdocs, very short-term postdocs, and it was very hard for me to actually do research. I did my bachelor on environmental sciences, where I mainly did field work. After that, I did a master in environmental agrobiology that mixed a bit of field work with laboratory analysis. I did a master in data science as well. And during my PhD, it was in ecology, environmental sciences, and plant physiology, but mainly plant physiology. I started using all these data analysis tools to try to open up a bit more my research. So after doing my PhD in Spain, I was doing short-term postdocing. That was a very stressful period of my life because it was like 6 months postdocing, very hard. And after that, I secured a fellowship that it's called after a scientific important figure in Spain called Margarita Salas. And that postdoc forced me to go abroad and then come back to Spain. So it was a very peculiar program that I asked to go to the University of Oxford for 1 year and then come back to Spain. And during that year abroad, it was very hard, like with only 1 year, do the project that I write. Like it was impossible actually. And the project that I wrote, it was very open. It was just, I'm going to continue learning on what I have been doing. But so the main problem was that I didn't have any funding for actually doing research. So it was very hard to prove that my time in Oxford was going to be useful because I didn't have anything like a project I could work on. So in this way, well, I wanted to explain as well, my PhD was mainly on using stress markers to understand invasion biology. So it was between plant physiology, plant ecology with invasive species. And most of the techniques I was using was going to the field and collecting some ecophysiological measurements, but also taking samples with liquid nitrogen and analyzing them at the lab. I was using this to compare invasive and native species and the different ranges where the invaders appear or different conditions. When I was doing all these analysis, I realized that most of these stress markers are really informative, but at the same time, they are very time consuming, very expensive, and they destroy the sample. So it's very limiting the kind of experiments you can think of when you have all these requisites of being very expensive, time consuming, and destructive. So one of my motivations was try to reduce the cost of this kind of a lab analysis. And this is where I asked this project and I got funding from a small BES grant. It was called Monitoring and Cost Effectiveness of UAVs, that stands for drones. and biochemical traits to quantify plant responses to disturbance. And this grant was also under the program of the John Harper Award, which I'm very thankful of. In this project, what I wanted to do is try to move from these traditional approaches of taking samples, analyzing them at the lab with very time-consuming techniques and very expensive, to novel approaches of trying to infer all these plant metabolomics characteristics from drone images, multispectral images specifically. And I propose to bring my expertise on this lab analysis with the expertise on the group I was working at in Oxford, where they already have some drones and everything. I just needed a bit of help with the training and a bit of money to pay for the analysis. So during the project itself, for example, we collected some botanical data. We did this ecological characterization on a lot of species, and we collected a lot of images at different heights and flagging the different species that were of interest to try to bridge this ecophysiological and remote sensing world. We saw after analyzing these results that there has been some changes in the community composition and also in species traits. So we're hoping to meet this species level world with community level world and see how that fits. I'm not going to go into detail on this because the main purpose is to explain that in the context of the grant, but just drop me an email if you'd like to know more. For when we were working with images, we were collecting a lot of images at different levels with flagging the species and not flagging the species. So we could do this correspondence between species level and community level. And that was quite tricky and took a bit more time than expected. And actually the most time consuming task on this project was actually image analysis itself. I did a lot of analysis on how to align the different images from the different lenses of the multispectral camera, and also how to align pictures that were having these flags to say where the species were and without them. So actually, I wasn't expecting that, but it has been very productive to afterwards work on more images like this. What happened afterwards? So I had the opportunity to contribute, or be highlighted, my project being highlighted in the niche. So that was an amazing opportunity to get myself known and just contribute to this fascinating journal. And I have here a list of things that happened thanks to having this funding. So a couple of students collaborated with me. There was a master thesis from Marcel that worked specifically on this project, and he was the research assistant I needed to perform most of the lab analysis and data collection. There was also this student, Yasmin, part of the Unique Plus program in Oxford, that she worked on analyzing the images and putting together everything. So two learning possibilities for this couple of students with this project. There was an oral communication as well, where this project was included, talking about how we use AI and how we use images to understand ecosystems. Also, a security grant that was very related to the project. It was related to the use of images that I was mainly doing about this together with my PI. Also, I secured a fellowship, which is what I'm working right now at the lab. So I'm a Marie Curie fellow right now, and it was very useful for me to have this project in Oxford to help me build on those capacities and then have more a stable profile so I can share this. There was a related publication, not specifically of the results of the project, but with the experimental design. That it was really helpful to have the time to get involved in the experiment so I could publish this, for example. And there's an incoming publication that hopefully will go out soon, which actually allowed me to collaborate with more PIs that I was not collaborating previously, and with some postdocs as well. So mainly that was it. I think one of the main tips I had is, I think for me, this project was quite synergetic with my profile. It was something that I was envisioning that would be useful for other people and really fit my profile, my skills. And I think that's it. I'm gonna pass it over to Margaret. And thank you very much for listening.
Great. Thanks very much, Arola. It's really good to hear about your project and how the BS funded helps as well. And also really nice to see from that project you've secured another grant and you're now working on a fellowship. Yeah, it's really nice to hear. A reminder, if you do have any questions for Arola or any of the speakers, you can pop it into the Q&A at the bottom. But I'll now pass it over on to Margaret, who is one of the BES Outreach Grant winners. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you very much. My name is Margaret. I'm happy to be part of today's webinar. I'm happy to share with you my project. So I'm an invertebrate ecologist, and my BES project it's an outreach grant on marine biodiversity. So the project is dubbed Through a Child's Eye, a snapshot of marine biodiversity. Throughout my work as an invertebrate ecologist, I've realized that a lot of people know biodiversity that serves as food. So essentially fish, and amongst the invertebrates, the ones that are edible or the ones that feature in everyday diets. But many people do not have ideas about organisms in the marine ecosystems that are not part of their food. Meanwhile, marine organisms are very important. They produce oxygen, climate regulation, nutrient cycling, etc. And where I come from, there are a lot of activities going on that threaten the marine ecosystems, like illegal mining on water bodies, sand winning, etc. And there is always the talk about conservation. But how do we conserve the marine ecosystem or marine organisms when you do not even know what is there? So this project aims to introduce marine organisms to local people, especially children. The project targeted children because it's believed that early experiences and learning shape your attitude and behaviors. Also, children are able to keep us accountable. So when children are empowered, they make sure you adults do the right thing or you are accountable. So we targeted children so that they get to know a lot of marine organisms and their importance. Then from that level, conservation or the talk on conservation organisms become easier because you know what is there, you know what you are conserving, and you know the value of your conservation activity or action. So we have a lot of videos from our projects that are on YouTube with the link on the slide. Yeah. So before the project or the pre-assessment, my team and I went around in basic schools to check what the children know about marine biodiversity generally. And before the project or before our outreach activity, you realize there is little knowledge on marine biodiversity among young people. About 80% of them have no idea what marine biodiversity is. And then after the project, the knowledge on marine biodiversity increased. And also the type of organisms also increased. Initially, a lot of them, when asked about marine biodiversity, give fish examples because that is what they know, that is what they eat. But after the outreach, they got to know a lot of organisms in the marine ecosystems like the polychaetes, the plankton, the algae, etc. that do not necessarily form part of their diet, but they got to know the importance of this organism after the outreach activity. Additionally, the children were asked what they want to do if they would like to have careers connected to the marine ecosystem. And before the outreach, majority of them, over 90% of them said no. They said no because they do not even know the opportunities available. But after the outreach activity, they got to know a lot more options available aside fishing. Because these children are familiar with fishing or their parents are either fishermen, fishmongers, so they're in the fisheries industry. But after the outreach, they got to know there are other options available if you do not want to go into fishing. And so the people who wanted to work or do have careers associated with the marine ecosystem increased. Now, the tips I would like to share is that when developing a project, you should be clear on what the problem is and then your approach to solving this problem. When the problem is not clear, then you cannot solve it, or nobody appreciates what the problem is. And you also make sure that the approach you are bringing, the impacts are clear, because no funder is going to give you money for something they are not sure of. If you are not going to make any impact, then why are we giving you money? So you also have to consider the funder's priority, what they cover. If the founder is looking for storytellers and you are not a storyteller, clearly that is not for you. So you move on to something else, because there are a lot of opportunities there, and you look at the one that fits into your work or your project fits into. Then have a compelling proposal. There are going to be a lot of projects or a lot of proposals, very good proposals. So my go-to is usually to share my proposal or my idea with my office mate. He serves as the scientist to look at the science, the rigor of the science. Is the science good? And also serves as, I usually would ask him, put your science aside and look at this. Do you think it's convincing? Do you understand or appreciate why this work is important? If the closest person to you cannot appreciate the project, then the reviewer of your proposal would not appreciate it. So you have to make sure it is clear and compelling. Then be proactive. There are many times we have a lot of ideas. You don't put them on paper. You just wait till maybe a few days to submission and start putting things together. As much as possible, be proactive, put ideas on paper and work around it, develop it. Then when the call is open, you write a good proposal and submit. And most importantly, be flexible and open-minded. You are not going to get funding for every proposal you submit, but take the comments very seriously. I've had personal experiences where I applied for a fund, I didn't get it, but with the comments, I worked on it and sent to other funders, and I got 2 funding for the same project because I took the comments from the rejected proposal very seriously, and it made the proposal better. Then what are the importance of funding for your career or your research? Funding is very important because it gives you opportunities. Without the money, you are not able to do any work. So funding is very critical, and therefore it's important as a researcher to seek for funding. And when you seek for funding and you get your funding, it builds your expertise and also gives you recognition. So working on 1 or 2 projects, at the end, everybody knows this so-and-so person is an expert in this. And it widens your networks and influence. So you build a career as an invertebrate ecologist, I build a career. Everybody knows within my space, I work on invertebrates. When you put my name on Google, for instance, you will find something invertebrate or macroinvertebrate. So it opens your network and gives you recognition. You would also realize from Erola's presentation that it gives you the opportunity to build capacity, because she was able to support 2 students. So funding helps you build capacity and also educate people, because what is the essence of doing the science without outreach or communicating the science? When you have funds, you are able to go out there and communicate your science effectively aside writing articles. And it promotes career progression. My personal experience, my first grant came when I just started working as a lecturer. And because I had projects, I was able to take on 2 students and I got the chance to supervise them. At that time, I was on probation. So without the fund, I wouldn't have been given the chance to supervise students. But because the project was mine and I was providing grants for the students, I had a chance to supervise. So it helps in your career progression. And also helps you to, at the end of the day, you write projects, you get projects, you are able to write articles, so you are able to move up your career. So it's very important as a researcher to build, to write projects, get funding, to build your career, to create a niche for yourself. And the other thing I want to say is that you should be realistic in whatever proposal or whatever grant you are seeking for. Be realistic. If it is not realistic, the reviewer will not find it realistic. So be realistic. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Margaret. That was really insightful. I really liked how you talked about the steps before applying for an application as well, just sitting down and having that think before you start to write everything out. Again, a reminder, if anyone's got any questions for any speakers, pop them into the Q&A chat. So it can be about their projects, or it can be about their experience with grant applications or managing grants in general. But while you are thinking of questions, I'll pass you on to our next speaker, who is another small research grant winner, which is Tom.
Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, pleased to be here and chat to you about these things. I don't have any slides, so I'll just be having a chat with you, really. And just wanted to first introduce myself. So I'm a specialist in wild soundscapes. And by that, I mean I work on an interdisciplinary level, actually. So sort of in the creative disciplines and the arts, I'm a composer, a sound designer, and a field recordist. And in the ecological sciences, I work as a soundscape ecologist and ecoacoustician. And I think in terms of funding, that actually, even though it allows me to have access to a wide array of funding pots, it also can be very tricky sometimes to kind of find those that you're the right fit for. So if there's any of you working out there in that sort of interdisciplinary space, you probably know what I mean. And the first funding that I was successful with, which I just wanted to flag really early on, because it may be suitable for many of you, was a Churchill traveling fellowship. They were the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. And as a composer, I approached them for a fellowship in science and innovation. And I think it's a testament to their kind of open-mindedness that they were able to award me with that. And that really helped kickstart my journey into soundscape ecology. That was back in 2017. I was able to go and work with Bernie Krause, a kind of real pioneer of the field of soundscape ecology and ecoacoustics. And I was able to spend 6 weeks working with him, and he became my mentor. And that's kind of fed on to where I am now, really. So currently, I'm still in the midst of my PhD at Falmouth University in Cornwall, and also Sussex, University of Sussex. The PhD is in soundscape ecology and ecoacoustics. And if you're not familiar, soundscape ecology is, in simplest terms, is the study of all the sound that emanates within an ecosystem at one time and place. And it's through the study of the soundscape, of all of that sound, that soundscape ecologists and ecoacousticians try to infer different changes in those ecosystems, different things that are occurring in, and just another way of really accessing and comprehending what's going on in kind of different wild places. So my focus in my research has been on studying what we call the biophony. And the biophony is all the biological sound in one time and one place. And I was really spurred on to start to my PhD kind of emerged from an assertion of Bernie Krause's, who has an archive, the Bernie Krause Natural Sound Archive, that stretches back to about 1960. And his archive is of these high fidelity, so really high quality recorded soundscapes. And he has an assertion that 50% of that archive is either so radically altered that many of those soundscapes are no longer recognizable, or in fact, many of them are functionally extinct. So it seemed to me that we had a really big collection of soundscape recordings that we had no real way of utilizing. So Bernie had done a lot of work, and the work I'd done with him had been around a lot of art installations and I guess public outreach and awareness and creativity with these things, but we had no way of bringing those into a scientific space. So that's where my PhD came in. And I worked with the two archives, the Bernie Krause Natural Sound Archive and the Nature Sound Society Archive. And in the simplest sense, my project involved studying dawn choruses over about a 2-decade period. So it'd have a few recordings from each year, and it was about kind of making sense of how they're changing. So that's where I kind of met two hurdles, really. First one was I hadn't really considered this when I started the PhD, but there was no real means of actually assessing and analyzing those changes. So a big part of my PhD pivoted towards needing to develop a new method. So I developed a new qualitative method for soundscape analysis called the sonic method. And the other sort of more pressing hurdle, especially in the middle of the PhD, was I needed to get a team of 4 field recordists out into very remote and wild locations. And as you can imagine, and many of you may know, that's not a very cheap thing to do. So I got to this point where it was like, well, with no money, there's no project. So it became very much about needing to get that support. So that's where the British Ecological Society came in, actually. And ultimately, they just paid for the very boring stuff, really crucial stuff, but very boring. They paid for the food, the transport, the funding was really needed just to get every of those kind of small, those necessities that would keep us well and alive in remote locations. So that was kind of on the money side, it was just very practical stuff that we needed, but that facilitated the work. So with the BAS money, we were able to get out into these locations, and I was working in mainly 3 major locations in California. So 2 of these were in out in sort of remote areas of 2 famous national parks. One of them was Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park and Yosemite National Park. And another location was in the Mayacama Mountains. And they all had, each of these places had their own requirements, and some of them were easier to work in than others, and they would need a lot of prep and planning. So it's just a lot of logistics, and that's where they really came in handy. The other reason we needed to have such a large team, which really required funding, was that the protocol we were working to required that we were recording at particular times in particular days to sort of add the data that we needed to kind of finish the study. So we needed 4 recordists, couldn't be done by yourself. So that was a kind of part of that reality of the project. So we had 30 days in the field that needed to be funded, and we had to have 4 people there for 30 days. The last thing I would say, actually, the team was also needed because in my original proposition for the project, I did want to try and do this solo. I thought maybe I could do it by myself, wouldn't need the money, be much cheaper. But the university said, no, there's no way we can have you in wilderness locations working alone. No way we can allow that on the health and safety. And the kind of one of the main admin staff, they just said to me, imagine the paperwork if you get eaten by a bear. So I would say that part of this is also getting the funding, having everything in place is also good for your organizations and your admin teams. It's good practice, good research ethics. So that's really the project and where I came to with that. So my experience with funding for that project in particular, I had 2 streams. So the first was actually I ran a crowdfunding campaign. I used a small, I think it might be Kickstarter or one of those ones. And this was interesting actually to try that. So I do recommend that if you're interested in that, it's always good to try it. You can produce a small pot. I think I didn't raise a lot of money that way, but it brought me in about £1,500, which was considerable. And one thing I found for that really interesting was if you're creating a crowdfunding campaign, the kind of language you have to use is altered, and you have to really think about your project in different ways. So I found that actually whilst applying for these funding grants, it was very good to think about your audience and the kinds of language, going from sometimes very simple, but to really get your point across, to maybe being more specific. Another big portion of the funding obviously came from the BES Small Research Grant, which actually in the end became quite central to that journey. And I'd say that, then we've said clarity is key. That seems to be a given. But I'd say, really get behind your idea, get behind your work, sort of you're showing, okay, your ability to actually get this project from A to B, but really it's also about your passion. I don't think anyone really, just from being practical, you have to sell, this is actually, you're the person that's going to do this. And I think that's what got me through the Winston Churchill Fellowship. And I'm sure that would have helped with the BES, because like I say, I'm not necessarily coming from a traditional ecology background. It's all very mixed. So that was a big part of it. Obviously with funding as well, I mean, I guess most of you would have done this already, which is, throw out a wide net and then you kind of find these different funding bodies. So that's kind of stage 1, isn't it? And then your second stage is to focus in. And I would say, it is really worth being targeted and really considering in the first instance, which might seem such obvious advice, but just be really aware of who is it that you're actually applying to and are you actually suitable? I could tell you stories of how I've wasted my time trying to bend my research into fitting all kinds of different remits of history societies and all sorts. So that was really primary. And I got to say, when I applied for the British Ecological Society's small research grant, it really did feel like my project answered that call. So spending some real time and getting to know the funder and what the funding is doing is like absolutely key in the first instance. So I would just say, you know, the knock-on effect, as well as the money, that was incredibly useful. The kind of the credibility that actually having some really good funders behind you brings is really useful. It it kind of helps you raise the significance of your work and shows others quite quickly that there are other people around you, other peers, other professionals who have actually seen the value in what you do. So that is a really, really useful thing to have. And I'd also say the feedback from the BS was really great. And obviously having positive feedback is nice, but also seeing where their concerns were in the feedback allowed me to simultaneously kind of raise the significance of my work, but also kind of hone it again and really knuckle my ideas down, both through the process of applying for the research, in the kind of feedback from the grant, and then actually in writing the report and working with the British Ecological Society to do that. And across all of those stages, they were very supportive in getting the grant done. You know, they were very open and approachable for questions about, you know, I had real concerns. A lot of funding was restricted to PhD students. So I had real questions around, okay, if I'm a PhD student and have this sorts of funding, what's open to me? And they're also very supportive in actually getting the report done and finishing everything off. So if there's any concerns about if you've got, you know, the time consuming bit is the application. And after that, they're a really great organization, I think, to really help support you. So yeah, I mean, if you've got a project and you think it fits, then certainly go for it, and really good luck to you all. Yeah, I think that's me.
Great. Thanks very much, Tom. And before we move on to the next bit, we'll just have I think 2 questions have come into the chat. We'll go through those 2 questions first. And the first one's actually for you, Tom. So you've already kind of touched on this about like finding different funders. And I suppose what this question is implying is what is your process to find funders? Because I think for a lot of people, that's sometimes the hardest bit, finding the right funder. But how do you actually find funders? For example, you mentioned the Churchill people. How did you find them, you know? So what's your process?
With the Churchill Fellowship, that came through word of mouth through colleagues. So I think if you at your institution, if you're studying or if you're working somewhere, definitely ask around where other people have tried. It could be a really good way of getting an in and some insights. And otherwise, I think that first net of going really wide, there's good lists on the internet. There is one, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. I'd have to look for it. Maybe we can ping it out an email. But there is like a list of funding bodies of all kinds of different shapes and sizes, and all sort of some funds from, you know, £50 here and there to getting something really significant. I think it was through that list and really just dredging through the internet until you find the right names. Unfortunately, there's no sort of silver bullet. It just takes time. But yes, if you need the money and you want to, and you know, it's definitely worth spending that time. So yeah, unfortunately, no simple answer, but just research. And I think definitely chat to colleagues and people in your network. That's a really good place to start.
Great, thanks very much. And I think just to add to that for the people in the audience as well, a lot of funders will have other funders advertise on their website. So as all of the speakers have mentioned, you might find for that particular funder, you're not eligible for the grant, but the funders still want to help you complete your research. So they'll often have other funders on. So often it's just a case of finding one funder, and then it starts to spiral into what other funders you can find as well on their website. So a lot of time it is just searching. I think we have time for one more before we move on to my bit. So Arola, this is a question for you. And talks about how you found managing your own project independently. And did you find during your own project, was there any challenges that you had to overcome?
Can you repeat the first bit of the question? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So the first question is, how did you find managing a project independently? So of course, for many PhD students, they've got supervisors. For a grant like a a grant like a BES grant, it's often the money's given to one person and we rely on you then to complete the work. So how did you find that?
Yeah. So I actually find it was much more easier than I thought, especially because at that point I was also starting to manage another grant that was way more difficult. So I would say the BS makes things very easy in that particular case. And it is true that you have to, so it will depend a lot on your institution, because sometimes you have to like link it through and get through all the platforms that the institution has to manage that budget, whilst other institutions may be more free. For me, it was quite easy to manage the BS one. But for other ones, I would say that sometimes you have to overcome like really getting to understand how the system works, how the specific platform work for and in every institution to manage the budget and so on.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's something I get a lot of emails about as well. People ask me how they manage their projects, and ultimately the BES and many small funders will pass the funding on to you and trust you to research the project independently, but you might still need to check in with your institution to see what they want to do with the funding, because your institution might want the funding into their bank account, or they might say it can go into your personal account. So as you're applying for a grant application, you might want to check in with your supervisors and your finance team as well, just to see if you are successful, how that money should be managed and how that project should be managed. Great. So again, thanks very much to all our speakers. Again, there might be a bit of time at the end for any last minute questions, but I'm going to move on to my kind of part of the presentation now, which is talking a bit more about BES funding. And I'd like to emphasize that we're a small funder, and a lot of the stuff that the speakers were saying, what I'm saying as well, applies to BES grants, but applies to many small funders. So even though this relates to BES, you can relate a lot of this to other funders. One really nice thing about the BES grants is it's one of your kind of main big membership benefits. So if you are a BES member, it's one way to really make use of your benefit as well. So one of our kind of strict criteria is our grants are open to BES members only. What's a really nice part of that criteria is you can become a BES member and apply for a grant on the same day. Because I know some funders say you have to be a member for at least 3 months, but for us, membership, grant, same day. So that's nice as well. The way grants work in the BES, and again, this is the case for many small funders, is there can often be a grants team, either that's like one person or it can be multiple people. In the BES, I'm the main administrator for all our grants, but of course, we've got lots of other people too. We've got our review college, and our review college is made up of over 400 different people, and they are global as well. So our reviewers are from all over the world. And there is a way that you can join the BES Review College if you're interested, which I'll explain in our next slide. And their role is basically to review the grant applications. And as kind of Margaret said in her presentation, you almost just want to convince the reviewers that your project should be the one that's funded. So why are you the best person to carry it out? Another thing to remember with any review college, that with a place like the BES, because our reviewers are global, you need to keep that in mind. So for example, if you're from the UK and you said the RSPB, many people in the UK would know what that means, but someone in Mexico might not know what that acronym means. So when you are writing your applications, be considerate that people reviewing your application might not be aware of acronyms or organizations from your country. Another thing that we're doing as well is making sure, because we support the global ecological community, we make sure that at least 51% of our funding goes to Global South ecologists as well. So for Global South people, there isn't a separate grant scheme. They can still apply for any of our grants. And when we are doing the administration and the awarding process, we're making sure that at least half of all the funding is going to Global South ecologists. So as I said, this is the step-by-step process in the BES, but many small funders will follow this step. So the first thing you have to do, of course, is apply, and then you need to pass the eligibility checks. And I know Tom mentioned that a lot in his talk as well, that there's no point spending hours writing a grant application only to fall at the first hurdle because you aren't eligible. If you're ever unsure if you're eligible or not for a grant, my biggest piece of advice is to just contact the grants team, and they'll be able to tell you straight away if you're eligible or not. Of course, it's disappointing to find out if you're not eligible for a grant, but it can save you a lot of time and a lot of disappointment as well. So if ever in doubt, just get in touch with the funders grant team. And then once it is passed, your grant is reviewed by a review college. So in the BES, that's at least three people. And then our grants committee will read all the reviewers' comments to make sure they're all fair. And afterwards, you'll find the application outcome. And of course, there's only two options after that. Either your application was successful or unsuccessful. But many grant applications, you will get feedback. And all the speakers mentioned this as well. Often that feedback, even if you're successful, can help improve your project. Or if you're unsuccessful, it can help you write future applications as well. But grant writing is a skill. It does take a lot of practice, but apply for enough grants and you will eventually get there. So if anyone is interested in joining our review college, this is the criteria for us. So you don't need to be a BES member, but you do need to be undertaken or have completed an ecology-focused PhD, and you need to be the lead author of at least one published paper. And the reason why we ask for that is because you've got a better understanding then of the peer review process. Now, peer review in journals and grants is slightly different, but also they share a lot of similarities as well. So I know a link in the chat has just appeared to join our review college. So if you are interested in looking into that further afterwards, you can click that link and you can apply as well. Our next round of reviews will be happening in September. And then, of course, it's a voluntary role. So all our reviewers are voluntary, so they don't get any reimbursement for it. It's about 10 hours a year, 5 to 10 applications a year as well. And you'll only be assigned applications that match your expertise. So if you are interested, when you do sign into FlexiGrant, which is our grants management system, all you need to do is click Review College, and then you click Application Portal first, and then Review College, and the application form appears. It takes about 10 minutes to complete, but that's what it looks like. Another thing to touch on with grants. So as all the speakers said, unfortunately, you're not going to be successful in every single application you write. It is a little bit of trial and error, but most funders do have success rates as well. So in the BES, our success rates are around average. So average success rate for most grants is 12 to 15%, and ours are kind of hovering around that as well. But the whole point of this is not to be discouraged. So grant applications is a competitive process. There is very high success rates. Every single round, a funder will get more fundable applications than they've got funding available. So it is to understand that it is competitive but worthwhile process. So the grants we have this year, our next round opens on June the 12th. So just under 4 weeks, and we've got lots of different grants that you can apply for. So we've got 4 different types of research grants. Small research grant is our most popular grant, so that is a max of £5,000. And what I would say is, even though £5,000 might not be the biggest grant compared to other funders, I really wouldn't underestimate what a small amount of funding can do. As all our speakers highlighted, oftentimes a BES grant meant they got additional funding or fellowships or further projects as well. So what's really nice about the BES, you might have got this from the speakers, is we are quite an experimental funder. So we will often fund projects that don't have funding from other sources yet. So we funded a Roll as Plant project, Margaret's outreach project, and then of course Tom's soundscape ecology project as well. So we do really fund all types of research. We also have interdisciplinary grants, and we've got outreach grants as well. Of course, you know that now from Margaret's talk. But yeah, there are just some key dates to note for this one. And again, if you are interested in becoming a reviewer, you'll be sent reviews after the deadline, so around September time. So just some kind of quick grant writing tips. As I said, these are just like the key bits. First one is make sure your plan is clear and easy to follow. So I would say follow the order of the application form, make sure it's really nice and easy, and don't underestimate the power of a good lay summary. So your lay summary isn't meant to be filled with like scientific jargon and loads of statistics and everything. Your lay summary is what's meant to engage the audience. And this is where you really need to consider your reviewers, because if your reviewers, they might have knowledge in your area, but if you're studying a really niche topic or a really novel topic, it's unlikely your reviewer is going to understand it if it's novel. So you want to do the best effort you can to make sure that once reviewers read your lay summary, they've got a good understanding of your grant. If you've got a really complicated or short lay summary, the reviewer might not understand the rest of your application because they don't have that context. So a lay summary is really important. And the way I like to think of a lay summary is read it, get a friend to read it who doesn't have any idea what it is you do for your research, and see if they can understand it or if they've got any questions. But lay summaries are really, really important for grant applications. So one I've kind of covered already, but follow the format and instruction of the applications. Try not to leave blank sections. If there's a question in the application form, it's likely it's been asked for a reason. So try not to leave any sections blank. And even if you are leaving it blank, don't write NA, write the reason why you've not answered it. One really nice example I like to give this is people often leave the risk assessment section blank because they think their project doesn't have any risk. And that's just simply not the case. Every single project you do has risk. And one example, and this is a true example as well, that happened is someone was doing a desk-based study. So when they came to a risk assessment, they said there is no risk because I'm at my desk all day. And one of the reviewers picked up on this and they said, there is risk when you do desk-based studies because you have to make sure you've got the right chair, you've got the right screen, that you're taking screen breaks, and all these things that might seem obvious. But if this person thought there wasn't any risks doing a desk-based studies, it might mean they don't fully understand the workload involved when doing a 12-month desk-based project. So every single project's got risks, so just make sure you don't leave that one blank. And then we've got... So again, I mentioned this when I talked about our review college, but try and avoid acronyms and jargon and assumptions wherever you can. Don't rely on the reviewer to leave them blanks. Most application forms do have a word limit, and that word limit's for a reason, because if there wasn't a word limit, people would write 2,000 or 3,000 words, and reviewers don't have time for that. But at the same time, don't rely on the reviewer to fill in the blanks. So make sure everything is spelled out as clear as possible. And a really big one is just to find a need for your project as well. So in the BES, how is your project going to advance ecological science and understanding as well? So when you do a grant application, it's almost like a sales pitch, because at the end of the day, you are applying for a significant amount of money. You want to reassure the funder that their money is going for a good cause or towards a good project. And finally, you could follow all of these tips and write the best application. And unfortunately, you might still not get funded. There's no magic wand when it comes to grant applications. And that's why I refer back to my success rates, the slide that I showed you earlier, that it really just depends on how the application's written, who's reviewing it, how many applications have been received that round. But at the end of the day, it is a skill, and there is no magic wand when it comes to writing applications. It's just practice. Oops. So this slide here is just to really emphasize you and the impact of your project. And Margaret touched on this a lot in her last few slides, is you are basically selling why are you the best person to complete the project and why is it important as well. And one thing I really want to emphasize here is if you are a PhD student or an early career researcher and you don't have any published papers yet, or you're in your first year of your PhD, that doesn't mean you're any less likely to get funded compared to a senior researcher, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is convince the reviewers that even though I don't have a published paper, I've got lots of experience in this area, I've got this really supportive supervisor, or I've done X, Y, and Z. So I wouldn't worry too much about the competition and just worry about yourself and what evidence can you provide the reviewers to show that this project's worthwhile and why you're the best person to do it. And in the BS as well, we follow a thing called DORA, which means we don't ask reviewers to look at journal metrics when they're reviewing applications as well. So it doesn't matter the impact factor of the journal that you've published in. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a published paper yet, or you've not finished your PhD, that's no problem, because the BS really does fund researchers at all stages of their career. I wanted to bring up this slide particularly because pretty much the most common downfall or pitfall that people have when it comes to their grant applications is budgets. And budget can be split into time and money, but this is often the place where people don't provide the most accurate or correct information. So most importantly, you should be providing a detailed budget. So for example, in the BES, we offer £5,000. And if your budget literally just says research costs £5,000, that's unlikely to get funded because no one knows what it is they're funding. So I would break down your budget as much as possible. So try not to give massive lump sums. Now, of course, you're not going to know the full cost of everything straight away. So for example, travel, plane tickets, they go up and down in price, but you want to provide a pretty accurate estimate. Does your budget add up? So some application forms are not automated, and this is a mistake that comes up more often than you would think, but people write out their whole budget and then they find it doesn't actually add up at all. And then this is picked up on as well, because it means people might not have had attention to detail. And if you haven't paid attention to detail to your budget, the reviewers might question, do you have the attention to detail to complete your project as well? Other things, stuff like if you're saying you need 5 nights accommodation is £20 a night, but then your budget total is £200, it's stuff like this that shows that you haven't done your calculations. Check your budgets match your methods. So whatever equipment's in your methods, make sure that's in your budget. So for example, if you're doing a bird survey, and in your budget, you've asked for a pair of binoculars, but at no point have you said you were going to use binoculars in your methods, the reviewer is going to pick up on that as well, because you're asking for equipment that's not part of your methods. And this is part of don't assume as well, because you might think, oh, I'm doing a bird survey, it's obvious I need a pair of binoculars, but that might not be obvious to the reviewer. So whatever's in your budget, whatever's in your methods, make sure that's in your budget, or if you're asking for something in your budget, make sure that's in your method. So it kind of goes both ways. Do you need all the equipment requested? So for example, if you're doing a bat survey and you've said in your method you're going to set out 5 camera traps, but you've asked for 6 camera traps in your budget, but you've given no justification for that 6th one, that's going to be picked up as well. And again, it might be obvious, it might be a contingency in case one of the camera traps breaks, but if that's not explained in your budget justification, that's going to be picked up as well. Ensure your budget fits the funding criteria. So Tom mentioned this, he said, try not to bend your project too much. If you're asking for example, the BS doesn't fund salaries, and if your budget says you're asking for £1,000 salary or a monthly stipend, straight away, you're not going to get funded because you've not met the funding criteria. So just make sure you know what can and cannot be funded as well. And this is where I go back, if there's any doubt whatsoever, just get in touch with the grants team. Try to be accurate as possible, avoid under or overestimating. So reviewers do Google searches for items as well. So if you're requesting for an ID guide and you say it's £50, and a reviewer does a quick Google search and sees on Amazon for £20, they're going to ask, well, why are you asking for £50? Very simple example, but reviewers do their due diligence. So try not to over or underestimate your budget. Does your project cost more than the funds available? So for example, we give £5,000 max for small research. If your project costs £8,000, where's that other £3,000 coming from? And a big piece of advice I'll give is, if your project costs £8,000 and you're asking us for £5,000 and you don't have that other £3,000 secured yet, you're less likely to get funded because that carries a big element of risk as well. So make sure that if you are asking for more money than is available, that other money is already secured. Does your timelines match your budget? So for example, you're saying you need 1 month in the lab, you need 2 months in the lab, but your budget only is budgeted for 1 month, that's going to be picked up as well. So this goes back to making sure your budgets match your methods. Do the date of your project fall in the award and timeline? This one's really, really important. For example, if you applied for a grant in this round, it says on the website that your project should start between June and December. But if you applied for a grant in this round and you said your project started in March, that's less likely to get funded because most funders will not do retrospective funding for projects. So make sure your project date is after the funding decisions are made. And again, this happens quite a lot. We get a lot of projects that ask for with project start times that start after the funding decisions have been made. And again, final few points there is, can your project be completed in the timeline? So try not to be over ambitious, just have 1 or 2 aims and make sure that you're completing those aims in the timeline. Does your project fall on any key dates? So for example, if you are doing an outreach project and you say you're going to engage with with schools, but you're going to do your outreach in the summer holidays, then it's unlikely you're going to reach school classrooms. Just make sure your projects and the dates match. And finally, is your recording period and season as well? This one might seem very obvious, but we did get an application before. Someone said they were going to do a wildflower survey between October to December, which of course wildflowers aren't in season then, and this was picked up straight away. So just make sure that whatever you're doing, you're recording periods and season as well. So I'm quite conscious of time, but they're pretty much all of my top tips. Final bits are, don't be discouraged. It is a competitive process, but it's very worthwhile as well. All the feedback you get is very valuable. It helps you write future applications. As a role, it's touched on, managing your own project and budget. It's a really, really good experience for skill building and career progress as well. And just to repeat, don't underestimate what a small sum of money can achieve. So a key date for you there are the next round of BES grants does open on June 12th. So if you are considering applying for a grant, that's when our next round opens and it closes on September 8th. So thank you. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Dylan. I've just got time for 1 or 2 questions, if that's okay.
Yep.
The first question, who can be a reference on a grant application?
Yeah, so this is a question we get a lot of, who can be references, and your references can be supervisors, people you've worked with, and what a reference should do is they're pretty much backing you and your project. So your reference should say how they know you and why they support your project as well. But your reference shouldn't be directly involved in your project, because that creates a conflict of interest. So if your reference is going to be involved in your project, they can't be a reference because that's a conflict. But it's pretty much anyone who knows you, who you've worked with, who can support you and your project as well. And reviewers will often look at references when it comes to like really tight decisions of who should and shouldn't get funded. It might come down to references and how much support is given from them as well. And because your references, as much as you need to believe in your project, your references need to believe in your project as well.
Great, thank you. And I've got one which kind of has a yes or no answer. Is it possible to apply for 2 grants at the same time?
No.
There we go. That was quick and easy. Thanks so much, Dylan, and to everybody who joined us today on this webinar, our fantastic speakers and the questions in the Q&A, and Dylan, thanks so much. Hope to see you next week at our next spring series, which is a leadership discussion. See you then. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.